We've got a new exercise. I want you to write down your vision. Hi everyone. If you don't have a seat, there's a few more up at the front. And I'm just going to launch and start us off by saying thank you so much for being here. It's really amazing that you're here on a Monday evening in December with everything else going on in the world. So I'm really glad that you made it, especially because I named this the Anti-Capitalist Community Saving Network, which is about the least sexy name that I could imagine. But everyone came, and actually we sold out a week in advance without really any, like a huge push on that, and we've had door tickets and everything, which tells me something about how we're feeling about capitalism today, which is really great. Hands up. Anyone here who's currently paying back any debts or loans or mortgages? Or fines. Hands up if anyone here has ever received any direct financial support from their community. Interesting. Cool. Okay, we're going to start talking about it. So what is the Anti-Capitalist Community Saving Network? So the idea developed through my researching existing community saving models mostly from around the world, as well as looking at mutual aid groups, which I was also working in, communes, looking at banking and credit union structures, and crucially the history of economic relationships. I have no time for academics, but I do love reading books, so that's where it is. And so I'm going to just talk really quickly through it. So basically, communities have been finding ways to pool money since as long as you can imagine. It's a way of leveling up and creating resilience, and it's been going on for thousands of years. And so contrary to what Hollywood and neo-colonial curriculum history teaches you, there's evidence of cooperative uses of wealth in communities between tribes and networks of families, and even larger into large city-states everywhere. It's historical, it's referenced in loads and loads of different places. A lot of it has been looted and it's sitting in the British Museum. And this makes sense, because in larger agrarian societies, eventually what happened was temples and monarchs and wealthy factions started using this community basis, this resilient source of wealth, to start building public works for sanitation, recreation and worship, and carry out wars, or to make themselves obscenely wealthy. So we had greed and effectively capitalism back then as well. So what capitalism did was it sort of built itself on top of this. It's because it can use communities, it's because there is a resilient source of welfare. Right now, there are people using the models that we're going to talk about and that we've adapted all over the world. Every time I talk about rotating credit, which is one of the models we're going to be talking about tonight, people tell me about a version they know about from their community or from their ancestors' country. So you can Google Rotating Savings Credit Association, and you're going to find a list of at least 15 different versions from every continent except Antarctica. Here's a couple of the names. So these are all current community saving models. They're happening around the world right now. People are using them. Not banks, not microloans, none of that bullshit. So, one study, promise is the only study quote I've got. The rate of participation among adults in Congo, Cameroon, Gambia, Liberia, Ivory Coast, Togo and Nigeria fluctuates between 50% and 95% of the population. That's 2016. So these forms of financial mutual aid are threatened by capitalism because while the basic unit of wealth will always be the community, it's easier to extract wealth from individuals, which is how microlending came into being and why it's so pernicious. Especially since that individuals, it's a very, very last resort, will club together in groups and start taking care of each other, which is a little bit like what we're doing today. Many of us, it might feel like that's what we're doing. And that takes the pressure off the state. And that's why we also need to mobilize and do other things. So, in some places, traditional rotating savings groups, which is where communities pay into a common fund every month, and then once per cycle, one person takes the whole pot. And they're using these community saving groups to pay off the debts that they've earned from microlending. So they're using, this is a direct thing that's happening right now, where they're using community saving to pay off capitalist debts, which in a way just illustrates the history of it really beautifully. So, in recent centuries, capitalism has been supercharged by this sort of false Adam Smith history that people had always universally behaved in a self-regulating, self-interested markets of barter and supply and demand, leveraging access to wealth to maximize profit. But we know, in fact, that social factors, need and status drove exchange in pre-capitalist societies. And this is about as much evidence I'm going to give you, because I really want us to just spend the evening talking about what we're going to do. So, what's the need for it? Here's the first model. So, £60 can buy you 2 washes of about 20 kilos in a laundrette in West London. £600 can buy you a washing machine. It's not easy for many of us to save £600. We can probably just about get to the end of the month and save £60. But to have access to £600 is hard. But you can tell that through that relationship, you only need to do 10 washes, and you need a washing machine. And many of us probably do many more than 10 washes in a year. So having a washing machine would be a good investment, or at least a good investment for our community. So what happens with rotating credit is you could go to a loan, you could go get a loan from a bank, and then you've got interest. So then you could get your £600 up front if you've got a good enough credit rating, if you're not paying too many fines. And then you can pay back that £600, which you will, plus interest. So you're paying the bank. And interest is unproductive. This is money that the bad Samaritan had already in the first place, and they're giving it to you, and you're paying it back, and then you're giving them a little bit more on top of that. You're giving them money for money. You're making money breed. It's transferring your wages to an entity that has power, has access over you to do that. Community saving uses no interest. So you aren't losing any wealth anywhere in the transaction. Because the point of it is that by helping you buy a washing machine that could be shared among the whole community, you are leveling up the whole community. The reason why I'm really labouring this is because what we're talking about when we're talking about community saving is a whole different way of thinking and valuing. And we've all been taught so much to value the quick ability to get loans that actually valuing the whole community levelling up is really hard. It's a really hard idea for us to put into our bones and to really think about it. So this is what levelling up is through community saving. It builds resilience, and it's going to help us build beyond capitalism. So practicing these models, I'm hoping, is going to help knit communities together. It's something that's said about all the people who practice models as well, that coming together around them is one of the most important elements of them. And I hope it's also going to help us, once we're doing it, to imagine new ways beyond capitalism. Because once you're doing something, once you're practicing something with your body and with your wealth, and there's skin in the game, it starts to help you think beyond all the things that you've been taught. So there's also another thing here, which is a kind of disastrous element of it, which is that I strongly believe, and many, many others do, that we're absolutely going to head into another financial crisis within the next 10, 15 years. That's just because of climate change. That's just because of the climate and ecological emergency, plus everything else that's going on around the world. The volatility and the instability that's there right now means that cash is very, very vulnerable as well. So there is a pressing need for us as communities to try and invest in properties, shelter over our heads, to get out of rent relationships where, again, money is breeding for someone who you may not like, you may never meet, who is the same, again, in that story, who's charging you for shelter, which is another way of evaluating shouldn't be something that you're paying for at all. So it's really important, and for those who don't know, it's since the incorporation of central banks, it means that the uncoupling of the gold standard, effectively government wealth and currency is linked to lending to corporations and financial institutions. So that means when there is a financial crash, money itself changes value. And then your purchasing power, depending on what you have in your bank account, becomes relatively worthless. And that's why it's really important to have a house. It's much harder for the government to take away your house, whereas your savings is only insured up to £80,000 by the Financial Services Commission. But anyway, it could be less than that if there's a massive crash. And it takes years to get that anyway. So that's where we are. From a personal level, I live on a boat. I have had a terrible, terrible loan that ballooned during COVID when I lost almost all of my income. I live on a very, very small space with my partner back there who's been serving drinks and doing the food. And I can't afford, I work 7 days a week and I can't afford to move into anything better. And I know that I'm very privileged. There are many, many people who are in a much worse situation. We don't have the means, we don't have the ability to do that until, as communities, we start rallying together and helping each other and find ways that include things like communal living together, but also include things like buying a washing machine when you need it. So I've been looking at these different ways of saving from Bolivia, which is Pasanacu, which was one of the first on the list, which really inspired me, from how they used to work on the island of St. Kilda, to modern cooperative housing projects, to the kibbutzim, to Findhorn. There are many, many challenges that face communities, and not least is people. Another is inequality, another is decision making, another is wealth, but a key one is isolation. So many, many community projects are aimed in one focused vision involving the whole wealth and dreams and hopes of a particular group of people. So you've decided to get your friends together and you're going to get a community, and you put all your wealth into that and you really try and make it work. And that pressure of putting all of your skin in the game, all of your life's work into one thing, is just way too high. It magnifies every single issue. It makes a life milestone, like owning a place or moving into somewhere, become like the complete end of everything. And that's because it's so difficult to come up with community projects that you end up doing it as just one. And what I'm really hoping we can do here today is start 100,000 little community projects that might grow into something bigger, but that connect with each other, that create a network of projects that are working together. And to do that, I've had to focus on very, very simple financial models and very, very simple principles. And that's the dream that we're going to try and talk about now. So, 3 simple principles, 3 projects, and then we're going to get into groups and start talking about it. So, first principle, anti-capitalist. So we're not extracting wealth for ourselves at the expense of others. We thrive together through the power of sharing. This is Good Samaritan. Simple as that. Second, equity in the end. Equality now. And this is a really, really specific thing, and it's going to come up through every single model. In every single model, the idea is that people are engaging with a project under the provision that they, in the end, will have equity in it because they are putting in the same amount. And that means, even though someone might have a lot of money and be able to put, let's say you're buying a piece of land and someone's got loads of money, they can just put that money in now and then they've got their stake done. It might take you 10 years, and we'll talk about that more specifically in a moment. Because you've both committed to pay the same amount or to have invested the same amount, you are equal now. You're equal now in your decision making. And this is really, really important for a number of reasons that we're going to go into. Not least because one of the issues with a lot of communes that I've read loads and loads of case studies of why communes break down or where the tensions are. Huge, huge numbers. It's because of the inequity of stakes. People have different sized shares, people went in and they don't have a principle around it that allows you to say, okay, yes, someone's only paid in this much so far, but they have committed to paying that much. So the thing here that we're really trying to build is trust, right? But that trust exists anyway within our social relationships. It's just trust that we've got more skin in the game. That is exactly how community forms. When you have skin in the game and you have to trust people because they need to pay in. Because that's their wealth, that's their work, that's everything. And then, because it's your work and your wealth, you're investing in your community, not in your bank. Finally, respect, which is pretty simple. I'm just going to let the word deal with itself. So, those are the three principles. The other thing about the equity in the end is just something that's come up in a couple case studies I read is about reflecting inequalities onto the land. So this is really important because if you think a few generations ahead, you're thinking about it's not only your community project, but maybe later on down the line everyone's had an equal share. If you've divided the land up in really, really unequal ways because someone had more wealth and someone had less wealth or whatever, it becomes completely embedded in the land. And then it causes arguments down the line. So it's really important, this principle. There's ways to try and get around that. So first, structure. Dinner clubs. So, dinner clubs are really simple. We all do dinner clubs already, probably, if we've been out to dinner and we split the bill. That's exactly what I mean by dinner clubs. It's as simple as that. But in this model, dinner clubs are basically our kind of foundational thing, right? And we're going to talk about that later on, and we're going to form some today. Because you use dinner clubs to develop trust. You're sharing wealth. You're going to say, oh, let's do this. You can do it for, it could be a community event. It could be saving to go out together. My partner was talking about how there was a group of Spanish women, they used to save up over the course of a year, and then once a year they'd go out to a Michelin star restaurant because they really loved food and they wanted to, experience it. That's a version of a dinner club. It's absolutely like that. It could also be going around to friends' houses, doing it once a month or whatever, and each person putting in the same amount, and the person who's cooking taking all of that money and using it to cook and to give this amazing meal. So there's lots of different ways to divide it, as long as it's equal. And that's it, and that's as simple as it is. The reason why dinner clubs are a really foundational thing is it's a lovely community thing that you can do, it's really easy, and it's what I want you to go away here with. So unashamedly, I want you to leave here and to have some people's numbers, ideally some people who you haven't met but you found out live quite near you, and to go away and have dinner with them in a group at some point, maybe in January. And at that dinner, talk about the other things we're going to talk about here. And that's how we're going to help to make it grow. So the next thing is the rotating credit club. So this is the kind of foundational money pooling thing. With all of these, I've tried to make them extremely simple, but the ways in which you can develop them are just incredibly manifold. Just so many different ways of doing it. But focus on the simple kind of foundational blocks and then build out from there. That's what I'd recommend. So let's say you need £3,000 right away. So you cast the net to 30 people in your relationship, each in your kind of group networks. Each of them agrees to put in £3,000 stake over a certain period, with a guarantee that every time the pot reaches 3,000, it's paid out to someone, starting with the person in need. So this is based on the Bolivian credit group called Pasanacu. What they do there is exactly what I was describing earlier. It's easy to say, save 10 pesos at the end of a month. But 10 pesos doesn't really buy you very much. It buys you a little bit extra groceries. But if you've got a group of 20 people and you can save 200 pesos, you have access to that, and you go on a rotation over 20 months, then each person's just saving the 10 pesos that they had before, but once in 20 months they get 200 up front, and 200 could buy a fridge or a washing machine or a car. And so this way you're getting access to credit, you're getting access to larger amounts of finance that you would be able to do as an individual. So it's exactly based on that. Let's say you need £3,000 because something awful has happened. A tree blew through your roof, or you have to pay a really fucking great fine, right? Which is fair enough. So this has happened. How do you raise that money really quickly? All you need is the people in your community to commit to raise that amount of money for themselves individually over a large period of time. And so someone might have that money up front and they can put it straight in, so that you can have it straight away. But everyone in that community has agreed to share it. It makes less sense if someone can just do it straight away, but it still makes sense. The idea is that the community can do this on a rotating level to create a resilient pool. So that pool could then grow. Let's say you do it not because there's an accident or something there, but actually so that you can, let's say, have £200 on demand whenever you want it in your community pool. And that's great, because something might happen, you need that money, you take it out, and you know that you've been paying it in. All you need to do is track it, and you have a pool of wealth. And let's say you get to 200, no one's really pulling the money out, well, you can up it. You up it to 400, you up it to 600. And then your community has access to wealth, they're all putting in the same amount, it's community wealth, and it expands massively. Because you don't need to put in that much every month for it to reach its target, for it to reach a good amount of money. So it's a really interesting way of saving. What's really nice about it as well is because there is a real incentive to save. You're saving for your community, not just for yourself. So it's quite hard to put money away into your savings account, but in this way, it's going into a community pot, and you know someone in your community might really need that right now, and they'd be able to get it. And if no one needs it, that's great. It gives you a real temperature check on how your community is doing, and then you can also check in with people and go, I can tell this is not going well for that person. And then the community can rally around. So it's building, it's using finance to build community relationships that right now we're estranged from. So this is the one that a lot of people are interested in, which is community saving to buy, which is about buying land or buying communal housing. You could buy a community business, you could buy a community centre, you could buy something for a group. You could help a group out again. So this is another kind of interesting way. It uses exactly the same thing in a way. So let's say you want to buy a £1 million farm somewhere, and you've got a large enough group of people that want to do that. Let's say you've got 10 people who want to go in on a £1 million farm. So that's £100,000 per person that they're going to save, which isn't massively unreasonable. Well, I haven't told you how much space they have. It's bigger than a shipping container. So they've got a good amount of space, £100,000. You find the perfect farm, but no one's got £100,000 up front. But it just so happens you've actually got someone who's of a different generation, who's got a house and they've just sold that house, or someone's been bereaved and they've actually got money coming in. They can use that money to immediately inflate the amount that you're saving. So let's say someone does have access to £300,000, and 2 other people have access to £300,000. That's already £900,000, and the rest of you have access to enough to make up that number. So you buy the farm outright, but your stake is only £100,000. So now all that happens is, instead of owing a bank, the people who still pay have to owe that money to the people who have already spent the money. So those people get their investment back. No one has lost anything in this relationship. Everyone has gained because it's suddenly changed their material circumstances. No one has lost anything. The issue is there's no interest. The people that lent that money because they gave it out quicker don't get anything back from it, except the fact that they helped you buy something quicker. They helped, but they've got a stake in it because they're doing it too. So it's really about community movement. It's about all doing the same things together. That said, you could buy a £20 million property with a large enough group of people, and you could also go to a bank and get loans and do all that stuff. There's loads of other ways in which you could try and access financing from it. They start to break down fairly quickly if you make them overly complicated. But there are other ways of accessing wealth. There's other ways of getting grants. I've chosen specifically not to focus on them so that we can stick to the really simple structures and principles. There are a few things that have come out from research though that I did want to add in here. One is mobility. So just like the pressure on you if you've got a commune, and it's the only thing that you're doing, and you've managed to get this community together, it's really, really hard, and you're putting everything into this one thing, and you're not part of a network, you don't feel sort of safe around it. Not having mobility makes people act in very, very strange ways. So feeling completely trapped into a project because you put everything into it, and you won't be able to get out for 15 years. That's really, really terrifying. There's a very, very simple way out of this, which is that let's say you've got a property that is worth X pounds or whatever it is. Let's say you take the amount, you divide it by the number of you that are engaging with it, and you add 1. So let's say it's a £1 million property, and there's 10 people, and you're saving £100,000 each. You save £1,100,000. So you save an extra share, always, and you save that up front. So that means everyone, instead of saving £100,000, is now saving £110,000. And the reason for that is, once you've then bought the thing, and you commit, and if you commit that in advance, that means that if someone's mum dies in France, and they have to go and move back, they can. And by having that up front, the pressure changes. It becomes a much more consensual act. It's not a, oh my God, I've got to commit something and it's my entire, putting chains on you. It's, no, I'm still coming back to this thing because I really, really believe in it. So that's really important, the exit strategy. It's very, very simple. X shares, save for X plus 1. So that's basically enough of me talking. I think now what we're going to do is we're going to have a little Q&A, and then we're going to go into groups. So, are there any questions? Yes, Leo.
Who keeps the money? Who's in charge of the money?
It's up to you to decide. The most trustworthy person, or the person that doesn't bank with Barclays. It's really up to it's up to whatever group that you want to do it. I mean, you could also do it in Bitcoin, right? You could do a community wealth fund in whatever you want to do it. Like if you're really worried about the central banks, and the crash happening right now, do it in Bitcoin by all means. Choose something that's going to work for you. But that again is about the network, right? So we can then learn. Let's say a group over there does do it with Bitcoin, another group does it with euros, and another group's doing it with pounds. What's cool about that is we can then kind of look at what's doing well and what isn't. We can share that information between them as well. Yeah.
Sorry if I've done that wrong, but is the X plus 1 share, does that just safeguard against one person leaving?
Yes, yeah. So that's
if multiple people.
If multiple people leave,
the whole thing fell apart.
Yeah. So again, if you in your group, and it depends on the trust in your group, right? If you can see that there are circumstances that might pull multiple of you away, then you might say, actually, we should save for 3 extra shares right now. That makes loads of sense. You should absolutely do that. What you shouldn't do is just save the amount that you are. That's all I mean by that. So save for as many as you feel comfortable, but understand that obviously that's going to up the price, right? So, yeah.
You can always try and find someone to replace the person that's leaving.
Yeah, of course,
Yeah, exactly. So you could get someone to buy in. Obviously, while you're saving, while you haven't invested in the thing and your money isn't out there, someone could just leave and just take their money, right? It hasn't affected anything. It's only once you've actually committed to buy the thing that it becomes hard to get out of it, because you want to be able to leave, and you've put in all of that stuff, but you want to be able to leave with the stuff that you put in. And that's fair. That's a good way out. Yeah. At the back?
With the community buy scheme, what the principle is then there's a certain amount of people that are putting in a large proportion of upfront cash, and a certain amount of people that are promising to pay back that certain amount within the share. How do people that invest upfront also inflation-proof themselves if the payback is only for the cash value? So if they're investing 300,000 or 100,000, that's 200,000 that say takes 10 years to get back or whatever. How obviously the value of that would be eroded so much cash-wise. How do those schemes factor that in? Do those schemes factor that in? That's the question.
Well, again, it's something where I haven't kind of specifically talked about it, because if you're talking along, which you rightly probably would be at some point, talking along timescales of 30, 40 years, like modern mortgages, then yes, inflation is going to have a big effect on that. You have to decide though as a group. I mean, this is again something which I think each different group needs to work on and think about. As long as you're applying the principles and you begin to understand that. One group might go, well, I've got loads of cash, I'm putting that up front because I've got loads of cash right now, and I'm not worried about that kind of coming back to me in the same way because of my material circumstances. And so they might call it equity. You might have people from different generations or whatever it is who say, well, actually, I do have this wealth, but I don't need to keep it because what I want is this stake in the thing, so I will write down everything along the provision that I have equity in it. I'm not more than equal. It's when you go, oh well, I've got 4 times as much, so I should be 4 times as big as you. That's the wrong way to look at it. But yeah, inflation is definitely a conversation that needs to be had in the group.
I was wondering if you had any thoughts about criteria for making good groups. Is it shared values or friends or living next to one another? How should you decide who's in the group?
It's really hard. From the research, a lot of the groups that know each other really well is not necessarily a rule for that being good. There's a lot of volatility in that. It's hard. There's definitely not a rule there. Interestingly, there's like also you don't want a cult leader figure. That's come up quite a lot. But some level of randomness is quite good. Some level of people who are like adding some diversity in terms of they're not just my sort of orbit people, but they're here. They're doing the same thing as me. That seems to some of the ones that seem to be happier have that kind of because it allows people to get on with their own thing maybe without feeling so cool. I don't know what it is. I don't have any kind of psychological theories about it, but that's what I've come up with. Yeah. Shaz?
How do you cope with inheritance? Like my grandmother was left a field in Wales in the beginning of the 20th century, and that belongs to a sixth of a sixth. I have a sixth of a sixth. How do you cope with transitioning into in the future, if there is a future?
So one of the dreams of that as well is let's say yeah. Oh yes, so about inheritance. So if someone has inherited a sixth of a field, a 36th of a field, how do they deal with that? How do they cope with that? Murder 35 people. I don't know. It depends how much you want the field, right? I don't know. I don't know how you would deal with that.
So
yeah.
My take on that would be, if you have paid for a share, an equitable share, then is it your choice to say who you pass that on to?
Yes.
So that's the. Yeah.
Well, up to a point. Again, I think this is stuff that each group needs to work out, right?
Okay.
I didn't want to go into like how I think groups should do the decision making because I just really haven't found good rules for it. But I hope that if we, as capitalism is ending, we all come up with all these things, then we will come up with some stuff that's working well.
Yeah.
But I think it's a really good point in general. I should say there's a group here that I know is trying to raise money for land at the moment and to buy a house on it and so they're looking to raise £30,000. So for them as a community, they could use the community saving to buy, but they could also use the rotating credit model and try and get enough people who are hoping to put into that money on the provision that they engage with it over a really long period of time. So you can use it to raise money for certain things. Phoenix?
Something we're looking into the climate emergency centre, rather than remile usage for a year to 3 years, getting buildings longer term. I really like this, what you're proposing, but what's the difference or similarity between this and a community land trust or a community benefit society? Are they much more complex and what's the differences or similarities?
Yeah, so it depends. Each of them depend on like what their kind of goals and vision are. So they're all kind of specific to different things. Sometimes also using, which is something that I would recommend actually, is another thing that's come up with in community research is like the communes that work quite well have an interface with the outside world, whether it's they're selling vegetables or whether they've got a restaurant on site cooking their own stuff. Like if there's an engagement with the outside world, then it's constantly bringing new people into it, so you don't go away and kind of just grow your hair long, keep connecting, which is really important. I think those different models, so a lot of those models are also using at the moment in the UK like different grant structures and stuff to buy land, which is also something that would be really good to look at depending on each of the projects that groups are doing. So if you're buying a specific type of land for a specific community, then going and applying for grants would be great. It's different I think just in how the shares are held. So I'm trying to this is sort of a little bit more simple in a way, I think, what I'm asking for here. Yeah?
I got a little bit confused about the rotating credit. When you said that if there was the example of the takeover each month, it was like an 100 pesos and then in 20 months they had 200 pesos. But obviously that's the same as saving. I don't understand, like, I just don't understand.
No, it's exactly the same as saving. It's exactly the same as using the community together as a bank. The difference with it, so the game Pasanaku, let's say it's normally played by women in Bolivia who kind of run the household income there. And they let's use the same idea. So they're trying to put in, they say 10 pesos a month. Let's say there's 12, just for the usefulness of that number. There's 12 women in a circle. And they pay in each of them 12 pesos a month. So there's 120 pesos every month. And every month, one woman takes home 120 pesos. But each has only put in 10. And that means once a year, every woman will have got out everything that they put in, but that everything, because it's been saved for them by everyone, is more than as an individual you can save. Because it's exactly the same as a savings account. You're putting in a little bit each month, and at the end you pull it out. The difference is it's with the community, it's not with a bank, because the savings is volatile. It's not stored anywhere, and it's not individual. So you're just, every month, it's just your 10, but because that's 12 of you, it's 120.
And the readiness to, like, withdraw the money, is that based on the need? Would that be based on need, or would it be, like, I don't know what examples there would be, but, or would it be that it just is hot luck, you know?
Yeah, so one version is credit lottery. So Pasanaku is often a credit lottery, so it's just like, oh, you have need of it, no, so it's your month, you know, your April, or whatever it is, and it will just go around. But if you're using it for different things in your community, it can have it can come to a different thing. You're saving for a wedding, or something awful's happened. You've got a treatment. You've got to do this, and you can use it as a community thing. It's like it's sort of like crowdfunding without the kind of individualism of crowdfunding. It's using the community to be able to access wealth quickly, but then on the provision that you're going to pay that back each equally over a period of time, and then that adds resilience to it. So it's a different way of looking at it. But you could use it on oh my god, that person really has need of it, so then let's all do it. And often that's how it starts. It starts because someone's fallen into a terrible debt, or they need to buy a car, or something's they've got to take a flight to go and see their family that's dying somewhere, and they just can't afford it. Like there's loads of reasons. These are all actual case studies. That's what came to my head. You go and do that, and you ask your community for that help on the provision that you will also pay that back over a period of time that everyone pays.
Thank you.
Random?
I mean, I'm not sure this is the correct, but like, I guess, if you have a lot of money, it might be hard to understand why putting a bit of money and then getting it all back at some point in the year is not that exciting compared to just saving it for yourself. But if you don't have a lot of money, you will know that if you have, it's very tempting to spend that money, and it's very difficult to not touch that money. So, like if you, at the beginning of the month, when you have a bit of money, put £10 in, it's not going to make that much difference. It's being looked after so that you know that at some point you'll get a chunk of money, where if you were trying to look after it yourself, you'd just never, because by the end of the month you'd be so desperate, you'd just never, you'd never leave it untouched. So I don't know if that is the right interpretation of why it's useful, but I'm imagining that might be part of it anyway.
Yeah, that's exactly why it's useful. I mean, it's often used by people who don't have access to loans and credit as well. So a lot of these examples come from countries where they're not getting access to big bank credit, they're not able to level up in those ways. This is exactly how they're able to do it. When some of the communities were kind of shipped into the UK in the kind of Windrush generations, they weren't all given access to banking either. And so they had to form committees and different versions of this to basically fund their way through different changes in their life. So it's exactly the same thing, and that's exactly it when you're in a small community. If you've got massive wealth inequality within a group, then the other people within the group are getting relatively much less out of it than everyone who is getting that kind of base level. Graham?
So I suppose I just wanted to add, to me it's not just that it's hard to save money individually, because you're right, if you were really committed, you could just save that money yourself and buy your washing machine or whatever. But I think the really important thing for me is the community is the one that has value in its own right. And if you want to talk about it in capitalist terms, that network has value. And that's the really important value to be building. if we want system change, if we want to.
Yeah, it's exactly that. And on some level, there's a harvest cycle to the whole thing as well, and that goes with like growth. There's, all the longer economic discussions that we're not going to have tonight. But that's kind of the harvest thing here, is that the community is able to save that huge amount during the harvest period, but also has to say keep it there. And then how do you allot it to different groups of people? How do you recover that? Because your life circumstances are not stable necessarily. So you need to be able to have access to more than you necessarily are able to get at the end of a day. And this is how economies have always had to behave, because they do always operate sort of near equilibrium. Yeah, at the back.
Sounds like a national lottery, but at the community level. But has anyone thought of just doing like a small community lottery? Let's say it's for musicians or for poets, and you want to help poets.
Do it.
But you also do help from poets. Pounds, but I really not Facebook.
Yeah, another name for rotating credit is a rotating credit lottery. It depends on how you allot it. Right? It doesn't need to be a lottery, but that's definitely one way of doing it. And absolutely, that would be a great community to be part of this network, right? To have a community of poets who are saving for a poet lottery. That'd be brilliant.
Would that be like subject to taxes as well? And that's why people find it difficult to do it. Some sort of profit for paying tax, or is that not that? Or is it not that? If it's actually just community based,
yeah, I mean, if you start talking about large groups of people and large numbers, and you're trying to like make it a really, really big thing, I was thinking cash under the table, but if you're thinking like large, and you're big chance
of
it.
But at what point does it stop you just cash under the table?
Well, exactly. Once it gets to that point, I think you have to look into it. But I don't. I think the national lottery is tax exempt, so I think it's like it will then be determined by how you incorporate, right? So your poet lottery community at some point will have to incorporate. If you're larger than a group of 4 or 6 people, you have to incorporate anyway. If you're going to buy a common property, you have to be a company that's buying it. So
you have to look into the amount of people, I suppose. And then I'm guessing there's probably more poets in London than there is in Leeds. So just feels like the numbers in somewhere else.
yeah, I mean, we'll start to get into the weeds at some point, but but that's because you might find that at that point in time it starts getting very unequal. But the lottery system, isn't necessarily equal, because it can also just, if you have the money to buy 150 stakes in the lottery, then you're more likely to win, etc. So you start to reflect inequalities. But yeah, there's a way around that, I think. Yeah. Alex?
Could I ask you to just maybe elaborate a bit more on the role of the network in finding a lot of these answers?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I should have said, and that's why I'm nervous. This is the launch. This really is the launch. I've never talked, to this group of people or talked about this before in a big way at all. So thanks for bearing with me, and I know it's sort of rambly. But the network's role in this is that, and we'll hopefully start doing this, is all the different kind of groups, and I definitely need a lot of help with this as well, to try and track what the groups are doing, to try and grow the network, to come up with more and more different ideas for using this, and then to help connect those ideas together. So we'll need to have a way of communicating them and visualizing them and being able to get them out to everyone. So that's the idea behind it.
I was just wondering, in the worldwide examples of the rotating credit clubs, are there any examples of how they deal with maybe someone falling into hard times, not being able to pay that month, so they kind of fall behind? Does the community make up the difference, or is there any other strategies there potentially?
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, the community either can make up the difference, depends on what's in the pot already.
Yeah.
So that's the good thing about equity. Equity in the end, as a rule, is that and I should have been a little bit more on the figures with the kind of land buying stuff. If you've got those people who can pay in £300,000 straight up front, and then you've got other people who are saving and they can only save, let's say, £300 a month, and they're going to have to save that for 33 months or whatever it is, or 330 months, then that's a different, you're going to have to start factoring in all these different kind of elements to it. The most important thing is that you're keeping track of the totals. So in terms of variability, it's quite simple, because you're not talking about interest and lots of different compounding things that's trying to make someone else rich. You are just keeping track of, okay, that person couldn't pay this month, it's a terrible month for them. How do we then push it further down the line? And at some point as well, you're going to get into really difficult conversations like this person's not able to pay, this person's not able to keep up. You're starting to think and act like a bank, right? You're going to have to start going like, oh, you know, how do we deal with that? Is it because they need more help? What kind of help can we give as a community to that person to try and help them get back on their feet? So the skin is in the game as a community. So that's the real kind of change in thought here, is that we're really investing in each other, literally, rather than trying to avoid that intimacy. Yeah, Izzy.
By the way, just a simple question. I saw that you had your hand up a few times. Do you still want to ask? No, you good. Yeah, I just don't want to take up too many questions. But I had a thought around storing the money and also the inflation point, and also the idea around people not being able to pay. Is that one of the things that keeps the rich getting richer is compound interest, like returns on investments that then become a new investment that you then get more returns on. So individuals saving don't have access to a large amount of compound interest. But lots of people pooling money will get interest on that investment if they store it with, say, a savings account, and they get 5% interest if they don't spend it right away. And then that interest becomes part of the saving pool. And I was wondering if there is a way of doing that ethically, say with like a more ethical form of like lending, that means that the community has access to compound interest and they all get richer, and you have that extra like cushioning.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to, you know, the different banks are all, the credit unions won't kind of give out interest on savings account normally, but the, and you know, Triodos is obviously the other kind of ethical bank that everyone, and that's they do invest in like community-centered projects. That's what they use their kind of money for, and that's what they, you know, how they get their profit going. But I can't think of that many other banks that are that ethical that would do that. But yeah, you know, in theory, you could use that model if you're trying to benefit from that kind of countless inflationary thing.
It's difficult because if you're getting enough money together to buy a house one day, and you're saving for that amount of time, you're going to have to put that money somewhere. And it's good to put it somewhere that it won't appreciate in value.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering where that place will be, basically.
Yeah, it's a good question.
I might have the answer to that, but I'd have to look in my emails. There's some kind of ethical building society that I looked at which only invests in properties, in community properties. It looked really good when I had a look at it, but I haven't used it yet, or tested it or checked it. But
So there are ethical investment funds as well, potentially. So ethical ESG funds. I guess the group could decide if they will, want to invest for the minimum period of time, typically that you need to invest in those things, and then and you can be very selective with those things too, because ESG means different things to different people.
You might also invest in like a community business that you think is going to go really well, right? You could put your money there, thinking like, well, they'll give some back and do it on that provision. Again, the difficulty is trying to like agree a profit, because again, you're using it to make profit out of it. So it's a hard thing. Ben?
The example that you used of the £1 million fund and the way you presented that example, you sort of implied it relies upon something along the lines of maybe 2 or 3 people in that group inheriting or somehow getting £300,000 each or something. And for huge portions of, even in this country society, that's completely unrealistic.
Yeah.
That you find 10 people, that you won't get that money. And I'm wondering if there are ways that the same principle can work when you've got 10 people who absolutely don't have anything like that money and can't save £300 a month or anything close to that.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was just to illustrate that one thing that stumped me quite early on when I was working on this was what happens when people have kind of different amounts of capital up front, and how you could treat that if they can pay more than their share. Because for most people, to avoid inflationary problems, you want to be able to buy as quickly as possible. Also, that frees you up from the rent relationship, so then you should have more income, ideally. So that means you would then be able to pay in more. So that's kind of element one. That's why I kind of brought it in there. But yeah, I mean, if it's a pool of people that and they, you know, you're saving £200, £300 a month. To begin with, you're just trying to build up that savings pool together. You can incorporate, and there's a lot of research needs to be done into, like, with just projects actually doing it, going, okay, so then incorporate, find out whether you as an incorporation, if you've got a record of you having saved as a group together, and that's roughly stable, you could actually then take that to the bank and get a mortgage from it, if that's what you wanted to do. Understanding that you as a group are going to abide by these principles, but you are using the system to get your property. So you could do it that way. That's another way, which means that as a group you're harnessing your, like, collective power to save much more than you could as individuals. With some community things, depending on what projects also you're going to do on there's access to grants, there's other things that you can do about it. But no, I mean, on a very pure level, ideally you're all saving exactly the same amount for exactly the same amount of time. You know, that would be the simplest version. But that's, you know, obviously not normally how it can play out. Either. One more, and then I think
I think the other one, which is, like, I heard, but there's no guarantee, so I heard when I use my banking that is quite good, is NatWest. And NatWest I seem to have no difficulties at the moment. And I know if you want to do, like, say for example, if you wanted to do any, like, funding for a charity, I know it's quite safe for the moment.
Okay. Cool.
I don't know.
So we're gonna have dinner in a second, so don't you worry. I want us to just really quickly get into groups so that we can then have dinner with our groups. That's the idea. So it's really simple. And then what we're gonna introduce ourselves to these very simple things. Who are you? Where are you from? And what most interests you and why about community savings. So that's what you're going to talk about. So some of these questions as well, you can keep talking about them, and you can work on them together as a group. Because I think, yeah, that's where we'll go. So, are there any existing groups of people here who know each other? So it could be different communities, it could be different movements, it could be different, yeah. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to divide the room into 4. But then we're also going to try and find our or 5. We're going to divide the room into 5, and then also try and find communities together that exist as well. And then we're going to see how that works out. And then eventually, I basically want you to be in groups of about 8 or 10. So you might have to kick people into one side. So the way we're going to divide is really simple, but it's just an exercise for today. So don't worry about it. You can still talk to those people afterwards. We're going to divide it by geography, really simply. So I'm north, and as you look at it, that is northeast, that is northwest, and towards the middle of the room, between the 2 windows, that will be southeast, and that will be southwest. And at the very back near the bar, the lucky people are the people who aren't from London or this area, because I'm thinking in terms of London, because most people have come from London today, who can be the outer London folks near the bar, who I know are heavy drinkers anyway. Joking. And then within that, try and find your existing communities as well, and then choose together to find your little groups of 8 or 10. Move the chairs, move the chairs, move the chairs.